Okay, so the next speaker is Dr. Steve Thomas, who's going to cover all the environmental aspects of growing walnuts. So Steve is a senior scientist on Smart Systems, New Zealand Institute for Plant and Food Research. Steve's research career has primarily focused on mitigating environmental losses to water and air and enhancing soil quality across a range of cropping and pastoral systems. His expertise extends to developing methods to improve irrigation water, reduce nutrient losses and greenhouse gas emissions, and understanding soil carbon processes. Currently leads research on land suitability and productivity and a research program designed to provide knowledge to enable land users to make well-informed, values-based land use decisions. Steve has been at Plant and Food Research for over 20 years as a PhD in soil science from Lincoln University and a Masters in Land and Water Management. Welcome, Steve. Steve and his partner Sonia recently became owners of an established walnut orchard near Rolleston. They are members of the Walnut New Zealand Cooperative Limited and New Zealand Walnut Industry Group, and it's great to have Steve here.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. I'm not sure if we're going to get all the impacts, environmental impacts, but we'll see where we get to. And yeah, interesting, someone's brought up the carbon credits type of thing. I will try and address that later. It's yet to happen, basically, in horticultural crops, so, but we'll have a chat. So I guess, yeah, this is all very topical. So what I'm going to talk about is water footprints, water use, the water quality aspects associated with the farming, and the carbon footprints. So that all sort of ties in with sort of climate change. And if you want to thread through there, the climate has a huge impact on our rainfall, which is our water use, and our water quality. So there is a bit of a thread that you could weave through the whole lot anyway. So a lot of growers, farmers will be quite focused on this. A number of you, if you're sort of large-scale farmers, you would be doing farm environment plans. So as part of that, you will need to be understanding already what your emissions are going to be or will be soon, what your water use is going to be, and how you mitigate water quality issues. I've just acknowledged Sam, who's one of my colleagues, who's actually at Manaki Whenua, and we've been sort of working on this different crop systems. So fitting in the walnut orchards wasn't too big a step. So why am I actually going to be talking about that? It's assumed that walnut orchards have, so I'm going to sort of talk about the greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration first, then get on to the water side of things. But there's an assumption that we have a low carbon footprints, but that really hasn't been tested because there's a lack of measurements that have happened in New Zealand and overseas. So the New Zealand Walnut Industry Group wanted to know a bit about that. Where did they fit in terms of a land use? But to do that, need to go through, collect some information and do the calculations essentially. So I'm going to go through what I've recently done with Sam and with Walnut Industry Group in terms of telling you about those emissions. So there's the emissions, then there's the uptake by the trees in the shelter belt, and then there's a third bit, which is changes in soil carbon. So the soil holds a lot of carbon. So if you start emitting or losing soil carbon, you can make an impact as well in terms of your losses. Conversely, if you can increase the soil carbon, you sequester more. And then at the end of the day, we want to say, are we good or bad? Are we a net carbon sink? Are we a small emitter, or are we a large sink? So that's when you put all those numbers together. So I'm going to go through a bit of the method of how we got there, very briefly, because I don't need the detail. We used the New Zealand inventory methodology, so that's what New Zealand uses. And it's got a lot of information for a wide range of land uses, and it's got probably the best up-to-date data. It's work that's funded through MPI and MFE to improve these the values and the methodology. So we used that as the base, then went around and collected data from 4 growers. So Andrew was one of those. In fact, probably all the growers, one missing here today, were part of that. So it was just a snapshot really, but they're 4 contrasting orchards from the 2 hectare up to the 40 hectare. To be able to do this carbon inventory basically for an orchard, you need to consider 3 sets of gases. So there's the CO2, which is emitted from combustion of fuel. So that's the harvesting, mowing, spraying, all that type of thing. There's energy used for irrigation, and typically that's electricity. Washing and drying, so Andrew uses LPG, others use electricity. So they're essentially producing CO2 emissions. Then when you add fertiliser or you have returns of residues coming from your trees through leaf fall and so on, it puts a bit of nitrogen back into the soil. And from the nitrogen in the soil, there's microbial activity that produces nitrous oxide, laughing gas. But it's also a potent greenhouse gas. And the other important emission from an orchard could be from livestock. Now, a number of growers like Andrew have livestock in their system. A number of others don't. They just rely on mowing. So there's quite a range of different activities going on there. But they all contribute something to emissions. And hopefully you can see that from the back. The key message from this is that fuel is probably the biggest emitter from an orchard. And it's quite a different type of, many other land uses, it won't be fuel, it will be due to fertiliser inputs or grazing inputs. So this is probably more like what you'd find from different perennial crops. So fuel is a big one. The grazing is a big one because of the contribution from methane. Methane has a very large impact on the climate warming. So that's where grazing sort of is quite large if you're there using that. Washing and drying, so that's probably big on this this survey because of the contribution from LPG. So if you're using LPG to do your drying, it has a higher emission than using electricity, which is created from more sustainable hydro-type sources. The other big ones are residue. Fertiliser is small, and so the inputs of nitrogen fertiliser are small on our walnut orchards in New Zealand. And they're between about 4 and 55 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen going in, which is really quite small compared to some other land uses, like if you were doing dairy, it'd be obviously a lot higher. Probably more comparable to some other perennial land uses like vineyards and so on. But they are small, and that's why we don't see a lot of emissions contributing to this footprint. Just if you look on the right-hand side, those are the absolute numbers from the 4 orchards, and just gives you an idea that there's a big range in emissions. I won't go into it, but there is a range there. And the key number probably to focus on is the 1.6 tonnes of CO2 emitted from the orchard. Asked how this might compare to other land uses. This isn't a direct comparison with what I've just shown you. This is just looking at what happens when you just include the nitrous oxide and methane emissions, excludes the fuel and processing use. And the reason we've excluded it is so difficult to find out from other land uses what they're actually using in terms of fuel and processing. But this gives an idea of what the emissions are. So walnuts pretty low, kiwi fruits a wee bit higher, apples similar to walnuts. As soon as you get into the livestock, it bumps it up, and that's really just a thing to do with the methane emissions. So I'll move on. So that was the emissions. There was about 1.6 tonnes. We looked at what might be taken up by the trees. So trees are taking up CO2, they're converting it into carbon, and they're storing carbon in the trees for up to 35 years, at which point they don't accumulate any more carbon. It's sort of a net no change. So for up to 35 years, it can sequester 3.7 tonnes of carbon. That's not based on New Zealand data. We don't have any. It's based on American data, Californian data. But that's the best comparable information. There isn't a lot around. Then you include shelter belts, and there's another 1.2 tonnes of CO2, assuming you've got something like 400 metres of a shelter belt per hectare, which is what Andrew was talking about there. It can take up to 1.2 tonnes. But again, based on overseas data, it has been checked in other reports in New Zealand as being valid. And that's based on poplars for about 30 years. So when you add that and what the walnuts are taking up, you can see that there's a reasonable amount that's being taken up, and it's well offsetting what the emissions were. So going back to the 1.6 tonnes of CO2 that's being emitted through the fuel and everything else, it's about 1.5 times offsetting those emissions. So that's the sort of the positive thing. If I step back, we were looking at trees about 15 to 20 years old. Earlier on, obviously, they are going to be taking up carbon, and it's probably similar rates, so it's still good then. The one thing that we don't have a lot of certainty on, and could be a flaw in the whole envelope here, is that we don't know what's going on with soil carbon. Most of these farms came out of pasture, and in New Zealand, pasture is able to store a lot of carbon. So we don't know if it's being lost, if it's staying the same, or if it's increasing. The only study in New Zealand that's probably relevant to this is based on kiwi fruit, and they've looked at comparing pasture against kiwi fruit vineyard vines, and they saw that there was no net change. So that's good. If we assume that, everything's really nice and positive for walnut orchards. So we can at least say that the orchards are emitting more, they're removing more CO2 than they can emit. We just don't know how much, but it's likely to be in that order of 3 tonnes of CO2 per hectare per year. So the question about the credits, we can't credit at the moment. There are rules in terms of the ETS at the moment. You need a certain amount of shelter and width of shelter. The orchard itself isn't part of the ETS. Whether that will change or not, I don't know. If you want to compare it with if it's going to be a big deal or not, compared to plantation forest, it's about 1/10 of what they are sequestering per year. So that's maybe putting that in perspective, and maybe that's the reason we haven't seen it being brought into something like the ETS. So moving on, the water use. What's done here is taken a simple model to work out how much water walnuts use in their growing period. And the reason for doing that, we've got some reasonable ways of modelling this. And then we could actually start to, or what I was looking at here was looking at the variability over time, but also what water use requirements might change if you have different soil types. The key thing here is that the main water requirements are during December and January, and that's a sort of peak requirements about 5 millimetres a day. So your irrigation system should be geared up to producing that at some point. The irrigation, sorry, I'll go back to what the graph means. So the green line there is the actual water use, and because it's a deciduous tree, you can see that that increases as well as the demand is increasing due to the weather, the temperatures and so on. The solid blue lines are rainfall, and the light blue lines are from irrigation, predicted irrigation requirement. And this is all based on sort of 20 years of modelling Lincoln Met data. The red line at the bottom is when drainage might occur and the amount of drainage. This was modelled for a Lismore silt loam, so it's a shallow soil. It doesn't hold a lot of water. So in comparison to some of the other soils that other orchards are on, they could be on deep soils, which have a lot more storage. The difference in terms of the water requirements is a lot higher in terms of the irrigation. So the total requirements over September to March is about 700 to 800 millimetres. The rainfall for Lincoln over the last 20 years, the average is 587 millimetres, and that's got quite a range as well. And we'll be on one of the wetter years at the moment. The irrigation requirements for a deep soil is about 200 millimetres, and that ranges obviously because of the differences in rainfall each year. And for a shallow soil, there's quite a lot more. And that's really because the beauty of a walnut tree is that it can suck from deep down. So it's got a lot of water that it can tap into. And that's even better if you've got a deep soil. So once you get into the shallow soils, they hold a lot less water. Although it can get down 2 metres, it isn't able to take up as much. What it is able to do is take a lot more advantage of water than, say, a shallow rooted crop or pasture, which might only get down to 60 centimetres. So, yeah, it's pretty good. So I've got some comments here about water use being good under walnuts. It depends on what criteria you use. Per kilogram of product, it's maybe not so good, but as how much water you need to have a land use, it's pretty good compared to something like dairy, which would be applying water between September and May on these shallow soils and could be using up to 500 or 600 millimetres of water. So just gives you some ideas of the benefits of the walnut tree. The next part is around the drainage and nitrate leaching. Again, the walnut trees are pretty good for minimising drainage because of what I said before about having a deep rooting system. They're able to extract water from deep, which means that if nutrients and drainage goes below say 60 centimetres, it should be able to pick that up at some point. So what the models sort of predicting is that for the deep soil there's only drainage of on average 33 millimetres with a big range, but on the shallow soil you'll get more drainage, and that's just that ability to hold water is limiting that. So in terms of what nitrate leaching might be, nitrate leaching is dependent on what the amount of nitrogen is available to move in a soil profile, the amount of drainage, and that's a function of that soil type, and the rooting depth. So the estimates of leaching are somewhere below 15 kilograms of N, and the higher rate would be for that shallow soil. We don't have any measurements. Like most of the things I'm talking about today, we just don't have measurements, and partly because walnuts is just relatively small industry that there hasn't been the investment going into measuring those. It would be nice to have the data to work with on that. If you're worried about the risks, fertiliser and urine are the biggest risks. That sort of comes out in the greenhouse gas emissions. Because we're low inputs fertiliser, that's a low risk. Organic matter form, so I talked about residues going back in and they contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions, but they tend to break down more slowly than a synthetic fertiliser, so the release of nitrogen is not likely to be as great and the risk from high losses is small. So I think that's basically the story, the summary. Walnut orchards have low emissions compared to other land uses and crops. They are offset by tree growth. They are relatively low uses of irrigation water, depending on what metric you're interested in. But if you're looking at one land use over another here, if you're looking at how much return you get off in terms of dollars per millimetre added, it's still pretty favourable. And because we have this deep rooting, then we're able to use the resources as best we can. And we have low emissions in terms of to water, in terms of the quality. So that's basically my story.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Carolyn Lister, and Carolyn is here to share with us the nutritional benefits of walnuts. Carolyn is the Principal Scientist and Team Leader at our Food and Health Information New Zealand Institute for Plant and Food Research. Carolyn leads the Food and Health Information Team in New Zealand for Plant and Food Research and has been on staff for over 30 years. Has a BSc Honours and a PhD in Plant Biochemistry, and had a fellowship in the University of Glasgow which fueled her interest in the role of plant pigments in human health. So Carolyn's team manages the New Zealand Food Composition Database and drives a program to make food composition data easy to manage as well as more accessible and relevant to users. So there is a depth of experience here that's fantastic. It's neat to have someone like Carolyn involved with us. So Carolyn, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you. So I guess we've heard lots of that at the growing end of things, but what's really important is that there's a consumer pull, that there's a drive to buy the product, and particularly if it is a premium product, we're seeing more and more people interested in the human health end of things. And I know Andrew mentioned earlier about walnuts being a superfood, and I'll show you that it's not just him with a biased opinion, there's some truth to it. So I'll talk a little bit about what's actually in walnuts, the health benefits that have actually been demonstrated right through to really demonstrated in humans. It's not just, theoretical. And then the role that walnuts can play, particularly in some of the dietary trends that we're seeing, particularly mentioned earlier in the shift to sort of vegan, keto diets. And so let's get into it. So when we talk about the nutrition benefits of foods, it's really important that we look at what's in the amount that's normally eaten. So we look at what's in a serving size, and for walnuts we generally take this as 30 grams. So walnuts have got to actually be really packed with nutrients to deliver in a smaller amount than what we'd eat of some other foods. People spout about all sorts of health benefits of foods, but you've really got to put it into context of dietary needs. So we look at it in terms of if a food can deliver 10% of the recommended dietary intake in a serve, that's a source of that particular nutrient. If it's 25% of our daily needs in that little amount, that's a good source. So if we look at walnuts, they've got a whole lot of nutrients packed in a 30-gram serve. So there's a whole lot of B vitamins like thiamine, B6, folate, niacin. And then there's also some of the minerals. So there's manganese, there's magnesium, there's copper in there, phosphorus. And then really importantly, walnuts are one of the main sources of the omega-3 fatty acids. So they're generally present in things like fish. But walnuts have 3 grams of omega-3 fatty acid packed in a 30-gram serve. And the other fats that are in walnuts are actually healthy fats. There was a mention out in the orchard about these purple walnuts. And walnuts also contain all these other non-nutrients, what we call phytochemicals. And they have a whole range of health benefits, and particularly those black and purple walnuts have higher amounts of some of these phytochemicals. One of the really interesting ones is that some of the walnuts have serotonin, or what we call the happy or feel-good hormone. And some of these compounds are responsible for the health benefits. So if we look particularly at the nutrients that are present in walnut, these have a whole heap of well-established health benefits. And particularly important at the moment, they support a healthy immune system. So in the COVID world, everybody's looking for foods that help support a healthy immune system. They have antioxidants in them, so they help prevent damage to our cells from all sorts of things like UV light exposure. Quite a lot of fibre in walnuts, so keep your digestive system healthy. And all these other things, helping your red blood cells form, helping give you a source of energy and make your body use energy more effectively. But beyond those well-established functions of the nutrient, there's been quite a lot of studies looking at the specific health benefits of walnuts, and they're really, really diverse. So a lot of benefits, particularly around heart health. They help reduce blood pressure, reduce cholesterol. They reduce the risk factors for metabolic syndrome, help with hunger, so help keeping you feeling full for longer, so reduce overeating, improve male fertility, assist with management of diabetes, and also reduce the risk of diabetes. So once you've got it, but also helping stop getting diabetes. And one of the areas that's really been emerging is the role of walnuts in supporting brain health, which is, there we go, disappear for a minute. I mean, it's funny, they're the brain shape, but they actually do have lots of benefits for brain health. So there's a whole range of studies that have been done with everything from young males being shown to improve mood, right through to older people and potentially reducing the inflammation that's associated with things such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Other studies with older people helping reduce general cognitive decline, keeping the brain working really well. Some of these benefits may come from the omega-3 fatty acids, but they're likely to come from some of the other phytochemicals in walnuts as well. So if you want to keep your brain functioning well, eat walnuts. In this last bit, I'll just talk about some of the particular dietary trends we see and that walnuts have a really important role to play. Firstly, looking at the role in vegan and plant-based diets. These are really on the rise, and even for those that aren't going right to a vegan diet, a lot of people are looking to have more plant-based foods in their diet. And some of that is tied in with the environmental impact, so some of the things Steve talked about, but it's also generally in terms of health. So I mentioned before about walnuts having omega-3 fatty acids, so really important on a vegan diet. As most people generally get these from things like fish, but if we do, we can manage to get them through things like walnuts. And in the States, they're even producing milk, plant-based milk from walnuts and promoting it on the omega-3 fatty acid content. There's also the plant protein aspect. Walnuts aren't exceptionally high in protein when we look at the average data, but there are some varieties that are higher protein. And I guess the benefit of walnuts in terms of a protein source is that they also have flavour and sensory profiles that make them a good replacement for meat. The amino acid profile they do have all the essential amino acids we need in a diet. There's a couple that are limiting, but it's often looking at walnuts in combination with other plant proteins that is really important. So food formulators are really looking to walnuts as an ingredient. And as I mentioned, they're high in some of the B vitamins, and that's also really important on a vegan diet. And the other one in this respect is that protein foods are often very satiating, so they keep you feeling full for longer. And even despite walnuts not having a particularly high protein content, they do have that benefit of that satiating effect and keeping you full. One of the other dietary trends a lot of people have probably heard about is keto diets. So these are high in protein and fat and low in the available carbohydrates. So, and that's a major advantage walnuts have. They have very, very little sugar in them and lots of healthy fats. Some nuts differ in where they sit in a keto diet, and walnuts are one of the preferred nuts in terms of keto diets. And because they deliver nutrients as well, or the B vitamins, they're really, really important. Another advantage of having walnuts in the diet is, for example, if you put some walnuts on a salad, you've got healthy fats and they help absorb some of the other vitamins that are fat soluble in the leafy greens, for example. And you starting seeing more and more products incorporating walnuts in terms of keto snacks. Finally, the other dietary area with the increasing rates of obesity, diabetes, general metabolic syndrome, there's a lot of interest in diets to help combat these. And walnuts have a really valuable role to play. They're a diabetes-friendly snack because, as I said earlier, they're low in sugars. There's all the compounds in walnuts that help reduce cholesterol, the satiating effects. So it's that overall balance of nutrients that's in walnuts that make them a really healthy option. So finally, just to wrap up, hopefully I've shown there's a lot of reasons to eat walnuts, and I think with the growing interest at the consumer end, we'll see more and more pull for consumers wanting products containing walnuts. And as well as just the straight, snack option of eating them, there's lots of opportunities for them to be a high value ingredient in all sorts of foods. And lots of opportunities to promote the health benefits of walnuts, particularly in terms of the heart and the brain. So that's it. So thank you for your attention.
We're very fortunate to have Russell Hurst here. Where's Russell? And so Russell's been growing walnuts for a number of years, has been a long-time contributor and member of Walnut Industry Group, and is, well, I'll let Russell explain what he's doing, but he's the owner of Inverna Holdings, a large-scale dairy and sheep and beef operation in North Otago, and is someone that we thought would be neat to share Russell's view on things, because particularly if there's some other growers here from the sheep and beef or dairy industry, then Russell would be a great person to chat to. But can I introduce Russell?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Russell Hurst from Oamaru. At present, we've got about 2,100 hectares right beside the south side of the Waitaki River. The majority of it is all border dike irrigated, which is flood irrigation. We're milking 2,200 cows through 4 dairy units. We've got 4,000 superfine merino weather sheep. They run on our head race areas and wasteland. We've got a 500 cow nurse cow operation that we rear 3 calves per cow. They're the calves that come off the dairy cows. And I've also got 400 walnut trees. How I got to the walnut trees, my father, he planted about 30 in a small corner a number of years ago. And once they started fruiting, I could see it wasn't a large enough area to warrant any time and effort. And so it was either get the chainsaw out and take them out or increase the area. And so we planted another area adjoining that, which at present is up to about 400 trees. And they're probably 15 years old. The older ones are probably close on 30. And so we're getting a reasonable harvest off those now. We've brought a mechanical harvester. But at the moment, or 2 years ago, our irrigation company came out and said that we have to convert to spray irrigation, that the border dikes are no longer going to fit or will no longer be legal when the irrigation company renews their water right, which is due in 2030. And so the border dike irrigations, they use too much volume of water. Supposedly there's a lot of leaching. And so anyway, we have to convert to spray. Over the years, my father was mad on trees, and he's planted a lot of trees around the farm. The first farm that he bought had about 20 trees on it. Recently we had a count up, and we've now got over 80 kilometres of single row hedges, plus a number of small woodlights and bits and pieces. And so it was pretty soul destroying, you might say, trying to get the head round the fact we're going to have to take all these trees out and flatten our farm and put on centre pivots and spray irrigation. And I've felt for a number of years that because we've got good sunshine, plenty of water on the Waitaki, there's no limitations to water, and relatively good soils, that over time that land is too good for dairying, or will be too good for dairying. And I see that horticulture will play a part there. And so when the irrigation company gave us the ultimatum that we have to change by 2030, I sort of looked at the farm, and there was one or two areas that are very intensively sheltered. And I thought, well, that shelter looks the same as what the horticultural people have, that perhaps we go early and look at horticultural. So I got an outfit down from Nelson, and they did a desktop review of our area. They looked at the sunlight hours, the rainfall, temperatures, frosts, all those sort of things, and to come up to see with what crops would be suitable in North Otago. And the first one they threw at me was cherries, and I kicked them straight out the door, because prior to going into dairy, we converted our first dairy farm in 1982. Prior to going to that, we had 3 hectares of cherries and 3 hectares of apricots. And that stems back to the 70s when the old MAF sort of advocated diversification. And they told my father, or they recommended at that stage, because we were beside the river, cherries and apricots would do really well. And they were sort of looking at the Cromwell Central Otago area that was beside the Clutha. And so Dad planted those trees, but the MAF forgot that the Waitaki is in a plain, not a gorge, and we get the odd frost. And so the apricots, we got the odd crop off them, but not very good. And the cherries, every second row was a different variety, going from early maturing to late maturing. And the local blackbirds cottoned onto that, and they realised that they could get a feed starting the last week in November right through to the last week in January. And consequently, we got nothing. And so I think it was about 3 years after we went into dairying, the chainsaw came out and they disappeared, both orchards. So I'd had a dealing with cherries, and so I kicked these guys for touch out there. So the next recommendation was berries, being strawberries, raspberries, and there's a couple of local farmers in our area got small areas of berries and doing very, very well. And then apples was the other alternative. They said there's some later flowering varieties which would survive the frosts that we get in our area. And so we looked at all the numbers on that, tremendous returns from both those crops. But the major hurdle we felt was labour, and about that time was when COVID was kicking in and our borders were being closed, and the itinerant labour was disappearing. And even though that'll be short term, that it was just another consideration. And also cool storage, that the nearest cool storage and processing facilities for apples from Oamaru was either Cromwell or Nelson. There's a bit of apple going into Canterbury and South Canterbury, but as yet the cool stores haven't sprung up. And so with having a little knowledge of walnuts, I kept drifting back to there, and so we've made the decision to put in another 18 hectares of walnuts in the next 3 or 4 years, as soon as we can get rootstock and trees. And it's because probably a little knowledge that I've got of the walnuts. I know now that, and some say a little knowledge is dangerous, but they don't require too much labour. They're mechanically harvested. You don't have to harvest them today, unlike cherries and berries, which your harvest window is today. Whereas walnuts, as Andrew said, you've got 5 days or 10 days at the most, depending on your weather. So there's a bit of flexibility there. And the whole thing can be mechanised. We've made the decision to do that. There's already shelter in place. There's some big ugly poplar trees which we're going to trim back. Irrigation system we're going to have to change. Obviously with the border dikes, put in a spray system. In the back of my mind I had visions of the fixed grid pods, which you see in some of the dairy land. But I'm not sure, 1 or 2 people have now told me that you don't want water on tree trunks and things, so it's some of the finer details that I'm going to have to revisit in the next couple of years. The numbers for walnuts don't stack up to dairying, but the area that we're looking at changing now is not to cross a main road, and we can't get dairy cows to it. So when we're comparing the numbers, dairying was out of it. It was comparing it to the nurse cows or the sheep or other enterprises. So that's what we've arrived at.
Look, just building on that theme, I mean, land will go to best land use. And I went to a seminar once where a well-known person stood in front of everybody and said that he thinks that in his lifetime he will see the end of dairying in Canterbury on flat irrigated land, and that it will be replaced by horticulture. So if you can earn twice the money per hectare to produce a different crop that the consumer wants, then why wouldn't you? So in the case of the current numbers, they don't compare to dairying, that Russell's just commented on. But I guess that's a really nice lead in to the next discussion on walnut processing and marketing. Because to me, the only reason kiwi fruit is as successful as it is because of Zespri. So we spent a lot of time today talking about what's happening behind farm gate and the benefits of walnuts. But what is going to be paid for those walnuts, and what are we doing to maximise that payout? And then what is the signal that the consumer's sending us so that we can ensure that we're providing the best product possible to earn the most money per hectare? So the next session we've got is on walnut processing and marketing. Now, Shane McKenzie, our General Manager of the co-op, was going to deliver this, but unfortunately Shane woke up this morning with a sore throat and has gone and had a COVID test. So it's possibly nothing, but we wanted to make sure that we're being super cautious. So unfortunately you're going to have to listen to me give you a quick overview on our processing and marketing. I'm the chair of the New Zealand Walnut Co-op, so I spend quite a bit of time with Shane, and as do many of our growers here. And obviously our key goal is how can we get that payout higher. We've talked about how there's the potential with the new varieties to get 4 to 6 tonne a hectare. How do we as a co-op give you $5 a kilo for that? So how do you get that 30,000 income, 20,000 income per farm with your $4,000 to $5,000 costs? If you've got a 10 plus, $15,000 plus profit per hectare, then this is a real viable alternative for a lot of that land, and it will see a big swing towards it. And then obviously, how do you use that land whilst the trees mature through your other operations, cutting and carrying, or alternative revenue that's possible from that. So we're getting there. I've got a video that we'll play here that gives an overview of the processing. It's made me hungry. So Trickett's Grove is the brand of the Walnut Co-op, and there was a multitude of other brands, and we are merging them all into this and in the process of, I guess, rebranding our product under the Trickett's Grove brand. So just a little bit about the co-op. It was touched on earlier, but formed in 2015. We purchased a business that's been around since '96, so there was a whole lot of experience to build on. It's got about 46, I believe, shareholder suppliers at the moment, and there is some really talented staff there that have been there for some time that know exactly what they're doing. We did have about 9 more when we had a lot of manual operations, but through mechanisation and investment in technology, we have mechanised a number of operations, so we are now sitting on 7 staff. And we've got a really good a stable and loyal customer base, some really loyal people that love the product and have been following us and using the product for some time. One of the challenges of the co-op is it is driven by supplier volume. So the amount of trees are in the ground at least give us a long lead time to understand what we've got to prepare for. We're currently doing just shy of 200 tonne through the co-op. We think that with the trees that are in the ground at the moment, we can at least double that, potentially 2.5 times. So that means that without any new plantings, the co-op's got to handle about 400 to 500 tonne. We obviously would love new growers because we see it as a product for all the reasons we've talked about today, but also when you've got more volume through fixed cost structure, you can actually, do this bit even better still, and that would help the industry big time. So we've got here's the new brand. You saw some of those. Organics are a key part of the focus. There are quite a few growers that are organic growers, so there's got a separate brand to identify the organic range, and they are incredibly popular. We have a number of retail customers, so we're in most of the standard areas where you can buy your produce, and we've got a number of really good loyal B2B customers. My Food Bag is a recent new customer, and the neat thing about that, so we've got Pure Delish, you'll see the mueslis, more Wilson's 180 degrees, the crackers, those walnut crackers from 180 degrees are fantastic. But the neat thing about My Food Bag is they've actually got our branding on the packaging, which is not something that they normally do, but they've done that because they recognise that this is a partnership and it's quite a neat product for them to include in their offer. What are we doing? There's been a number of partnerships over the years with like Callaghan and SFFF, and we're trying to perpetually look at what's the best within the scale we've got and the knowledge of what we, those constraints that we have to deal with from a supply side. We are perpetually looking at where are the next opportunities, and there's been quite a lot of work done in that. Some recent ones are what's actually happening out there with the swing towards people wanting, vegetarian plant-based products, shop local. There's actually a big demand, increased demand for oil. And we see lots of collaboration opportunities like with My Food Bag that is coming to play. And then there is funding available if we've got the opportunity to increase a industry that's not only going to decrease imports, because that's our immediate substitution opportunity is substituting imports, but there's an opportunity to grow greater demand as people move towards eating products like walnuts, but also export opportunities. We've had a number of export queries, but to date our product is all sold or we don't quite have enough volume to meet the demands that they were asking from us, but there's a distinct interest in New Zealand grown walnuts because of what we do here with the land and the ways we are trying to treat it. Prioritising innovation, there's a number of things there that has been looked at from nutraceuticals, skincare, just the wise snacking, kids' lunches as examples, versus working with partners. So we're really only just scratching the surface on what we can do with these products. And as we gain more and more knowledge, it's actually about where can we take them or where do we choose to take them, as much as what the opportunities are. So pulling this all together, what does success look like? Customers do know that we're the source of New Zealand walnuts, so we get a lot of queries. We don't have to do a huge amount of external marketing. It's more relationship management, looking after the current customers we've got, or working out where that next big opportunity is to enhance the returns from the raw material. We really need to maximise the use of our plant. We've made sort of investments, so we need more volume through that. It is known to be a sustainable horticultural industry. It is known for the product quality, superiority, health benefits. We actually have a pretty good payout to growers, all things considered, but it's nowhere near where we want it and what our aspirations are for that. And sustainability is a key focus of ours. We've got to do more work in the processing plant to really understand what we can do there in a better way to decrease our carbon footprint. But that work's underway. So there's a number of different activities happening to really kind of make sure that what we're doing is the right thing from a processing marketing perspective. But as I said, we've just scratched the surface and there's huge opportunities there. I probably said that a lot quicker than Shane would have, but that's sort of a high level overview that there is. I guess what we wanted to share with new growers is that there is kind of significant history to our processing and marketing. We've skinned our knees, we are learning, we've got actually a pretty good market for the volume we've got, but I still believe there's significant opportunities in front of us to do more with what we've got as we're producing a better quality product, and particularly as more volume comes on board, to do some neater things that can enhance the returns and benefits that walnuts can provide. Any questions? Oh, right, so the cost to become a shareholder at the moment is $2.75 per kilo that you wish to supply. And so as you supply more, you share up more. The idea is that that enables us to invest in equipment to cater for that extra volume. The shares will change value. They are moved to market as the share value, so the investment current growers make, as that becomes, adds value, the shares will increase in value over time according to the real value. So you're effectively buying into a company at the fair value that that company's worth. Originally we knew that there would be a wee J-curve, a wee hockey stick to the investment where we needed to use some of the shareholders' investment to establish the business. But at the moment, the market value of the business is back. So we've gone through that J-curve over the last 7 years, is pretty much back and aligned with the current price that you would buy and have been buying shares. And so we see that share price increasing in coming years now that we're starting to get past that tipping point.
What do you do with the shelves?
What do we do with the shelves?
Yeah.
The shelves, that's why I guess one of these opportunities is, could it be used as a exfoliating facial scrub? There's some of the opportunities to bead blast carburetors because there's no steel. You know, these things have been investigated, but we didn't really have the scale. We were grading it at some stage, but now, where's Basil? Sorry, everyone looks the same with masks on. Basil, do you want to tell us what we're doing with them now?
Currently, we just haven't got the volumes, we haven't got the technology yet to be summing more value. So they come to our place and we use them as like mulch in the shelter belts to keep weeds and everything else there. As Andrew said, we've had in the past, customers who wanted the grain shell to use in water restoration instead of using sandblasting, we use shell blasting. BMW in Auckland, I believe, used it to clean out the manifolds in some of their models, right? There is opportunities. One thing we looked at is pressing them into briquettes and make 5 briquettes instead of whatever. It is not that easy, you know, looking at using it as a mix into plywood, walnut plywood for instance, things like that. There is potentially opportunities, but we just don't have the volume. We haven't had the time to really focus on that aspect.
Yeah, also, very high calorific value, so there's a real opportunity there as the kind of worst case scenario once we get that scale to keep them together. Any other questions? That moves us to the wrap for the day, and what I wanted to do is just very quickly talk about something which is a little bit more of the macro levels, and we heard a lot from Russell about some of the reasons why he's invested, which is a lot of them are often relative to the individual piece of land or personal circumstances. But what we are facing, the big key macro forces, there's consumer, environmental, and science and regulator, and there's other places you can go to get a lot more information from this, and I've stolen a couple of slides. But we know that there is unrelenting and growing pressure to decarbonise. There's an incredible strong focus on environmental sustainability, social licence to operate. The world's getting smaller, the consumer preferences are changing, and there is a whole lot of
investment happening in technology, which will change what New Zealand looks like in the next 10, 20 years. You know, we are seeing people say that alternative proteins can reach price parity within this decade and half the value in, in 10 plus 20 years. What does that mean for New Zealand and our, our dairy and sheep and beef farms? How are we going to market our product to keep things unique? We see legislation hitting us from all angles. There's a whole lot of things that have got to be done differently, and legislation is forcing us to do that in some cases, and in others, we're working alongside the legislators because we know it's important that we do address a lot of these things. And then if you look at what that discerning consumer with discretionary income is saying, I'll buy your product from you if you can prove to me that it's been produced in a way that aligns with my values, that is this product good for me and is it good for the planet? And what does it say about me as a consumer, as a purchaser of your product? So when you look at the agribusiness agenda, KPMG's one, there's a huge amount of work that was done on this, and these are just huge themes that are shaping what the consumer is doing and where they are spending their money. So the consumer demand for attributes positions growing walnuts really well. This is a plant-based, carbon sequestering, whole food, healthy food. Food is a medicine. The industry, we are focusing on doing the right thing, and it's still got a lot to do, but have a real opportunity there to link what happens on the orchard with what the consumer is buying. We are New Zealand based. We've got a rich culture that aligns with all of this. And there is a genuine opportunity for New Zealand. We believe there's a genuine opportunity in New Zealand for walnuts. I guess that comment that land will go to best land use, if we can get these new varieties producing $6+ tonne, and we can get, $5+ per kilo going, then there's a highly profitable industry here just waiting to be let loose. Top 10 world superfood, I love that when I read that. It's something that we are very passionate about, seeing that today. I forgot to mention that everybody with a name badge is a grower, and so if you want to chat to anyone, please do, particularly people with one of these, they are growers, and we're a pretty small bunch of people that really want to help anybody at all that's starting out, is interested in it, and or wants to pick anyone's brains. So please do that. Thank you again for the speakers today that have given their time to come out on the weekend. Thank you to those that made today happen, in particular the organising committee of Heather, Dave, Basil, and my family who've helped out immensely in this last week. And mostly thank you for you all for coming in your weekend today to learn a little bit more about a new and emerging industry. Really appreciate it, and if there's anything at all we can do to help with any of your queries, please just grab us. We're really here to see this industry grow. So, Kimberly, thank you.